So a data warehouse is a SQL server. I mean, at the end of the day, that's basically what it is. In fact, right here on the screen, you see that Fabric has its own dedicated data warehouse section. And that doesn't mean this is the only place that you can access data warehouse. You can access data warehouse basically anywhere that you can access your workspace, whether it's Power BI, data engineering, it doesn't really matter. You can get to your data warehouse, much like how you can get to your Lakehouse. It's a central store of data, and what you do is you build on top of it. What makes a data warehouse special is that it's built for scale. Again, much like a lakehouse is built for scale. It separates storage from compute. So these can scale independently of each other. Maybe we need more storage, but less compute, or more compute, but less storage, or more of both, and they kind of grow at their own rate. The thing is with data warehouses is oftentimes they are structured and laid out in such a way that they are more for read-heavy workloads, and therefore the data tables inside of it are structured for more read-heavy workloads. Now you might be thinking to yourself, well, that sounds an awful lot like Delta tables in the Lakehouse. And that part may be true. They do have an overlap in that regard. But there is one significant difference between the data warehouse and the Lakehouse. When we use the SQL analytics endpoint in the Lakehouse, the big kicker here is this is read only. You cannot use T-SQL to insert, update, or delete data. You can't use T-SQL to create new tables. It is a read-only, a strictly read-only workload built on top of those Parquet files in the Delta tables. With a data warehouse, this is a true CRUD operations SQL server, which means that we can use T-SQL to perform DDL, data definition language, effectively changing the schema of the database in the first place, as well as DML, data manipulation language, basically saying, of course, we can query the data using T-SQL, but we can also update the data, insert data, delete the data. And this is where the data warehouse really stands apart from the Lakehouse. If you kind of think about it, with the Lakehouse, you could be loading files and then perhaps do some ETL, but the ultimate destination here is going to be your Delta tables, at which point they kind of become data at rest, don't they? We can analyze that data. We can even pick up the data and move it further somewhere else if we really wanted to, but we can't transform the data as it stands in the table. We could maybe pick it up and pull it into Power BI and perform some changes in the semantic model. But again, we're not updating or changing the raw data itself. That's different from the data warehouse. The data warehouse is where we have the ability to actually edit and interact with the data. And that is using, of course, Transact SQL, the Microsoft dialect of the SQL language. So, of course, in order to work with the data warehouse, you need to create a data warehouse. And like I said, you can really get there from any of the experiences. I'll go into Synapse Data Warehouse right here. And then from here, I'll change into my workspace where I've been doing my work, like Lakehouse workspace right here. Now from here, I can create a new warehouse. It's right here at the bottom. It even kind of looks like the Lakehouse symbol, except for it doesn't have the little lake. It's got the little dots on it. In fact, this is actually the same symbol as the SQL Analytics endpoint, which is really confusing, I think, to a lot of people, because the SQL Analytics endpoint, as we know, is not the same thing as a data warehouse. The SQL Analytics endpoint, again, is read-only. So even though they have the same symbol, you'll have to trust me that this warehouse right here is for storing data, as it tells you, storing strategic insights across multiple sources for your entire business. This is ultimately, in traditional ETL pipelines, this is the traditional data destination. Now, the big kickers here, of course, aside from the fact that this is a read-write workload, this is also rigid. When we define tables, tables have a schema, And sometimes once we create a table, it's hard to change the layout of that schema, or it's hard to change the layout of that table without just creating an entirely new table and migrating data. That is different from a lakehouse, which can store both structured and unstructured or semi-structured data. There's no storing of JSON data in a data warehouse, is there? No, it's got to be structured tabular data. Whereas with a lakehouse, we could store unstructured data and migrate that into a Delta table. So, understanding the differences between a lakehouse and a warehouse and choosing to stick with a data warehouse here because we want, basically the ability maybe to migrate our data from an existing warehouse into a warehouse that's built on top of one lake. Now, this is what we can do. I'll call this DataWare or something simple like that, and we'll click Create. Now, the interesting thing here is once this comes up, you'll see it has a very similar experience to one that you've been used to working with Lakehouse, especially when you've been working with the SQL Analytics endpoint. You can already start to see down here at the bottom, we've got a data view, a query view, and a model view. We'll have the ability to create our own queries and share queries. And we've even got the ability to define schemas. We'll have, of course, like a DBO schema, and then any additional schemas from there, as well as security layouts. Again, much like traditional SQL servers and SQL data warehouses that you may have worked with in the past. But again, with this new, more Fabric Lakehouse UI and UX experience. Now, when it comes to loading data into it, there's a bunch of things that we can do now, because now we can leverage T-SQL to create tables and insert data and stuff like that. And it tells you right here, T-SQL, you can create tables with T-SQL code. You can also use a data flow or a pipeline to create tables and load them. You can also use a SQL database schema project from an external tool. And then, of course, there's sample data right here, which I suspect it's a good idea to start with sample data for a lab-based environment. So all you have to do is give that one simple click, and you see it'll go through the process of creating the tables, inserting and loading the data, creating views, and then polishing things up for you. So let it spin for a second and check it out when it's done. And there we go. After a few moments, we see everything is updated. The entire view is updated. The schema section is now populated with the schema, which then comes with tables, views, functions, and sprocs. And if you click on a table, of course, you can see what the table looks like. You can explore the data types. You can even expand the table and see a schema overview of the column headers or the columns that exist within that table. So just like that, you've created a data warehouse. So in the next video, we'll pick it up from there and see what else we can do with this, particularly leveraging SQL to perform some DDL operations.